The sound of shattering glass silenced the crowded saloon as Eleanor Vance stood frozen, her trembling hands hovering above the broken remains of an expensive whiskey bottle that had slipped from her grasp. The year was 1878, and in Socorro, New Mexico, such mistakes could cost more than just a day's wages. They could seal a person's fate. "That's common out of your pay, girl," growled Silas Blackburn, the saloon owner, his thick fingers drumming on the polished counter. His eyes, cold and calculating, sized up Eleanor as if she were merchandise rather than a person. "Add it to your tab." Eleanor swallowed hard, her throat dry as the New Mexico desert. "Mr. Blackburn, please, it was an accident. I can't afford another deduction." The portly saloon owner's lips curled into a smile that never reached his eyes. "Then perhaps you should be more careful with my property. Clean it up before the evening rush." At 22, Eleanor had already endured more hardship than most faced in a lifetime. Orphaned at 17 when influenza claimed her parents, she traveled west from Pennsylvania in search of work, carrying little more than a small trunk of belongings and desperate hope. Socorro had been meant to be a temporary stop, but Blackburn's offer of employment at the Silver Spur had seemed like providence at the time. That was before she understood the true nature of her arrangement. Eleanor knelt to collect the shards of glass, ignoring the stinging cuts on her fingertips. Her calico dress, once a cheerful blue, had faded to a dull gray from countless washings. Like her spirits, the color had been slowly leached away during the 15 months she'd worked at Blackburn's establishment. "Need a hand?" Eleanor looked up to find Sarah Miller, another serving girl, crouched beside her with a rag. "He's adding it to my debt," Eleanor whispered, careful to ensure Blackburn couldn't overhear. Sarah's sympathetic grimace spoke volumes. "That makes what the third time this month. He's never going to let you leave, Ellie." Eleanor knew Sarah was right. What had begun as a simple arrangement room and board in exchange for work, until she could save enough to move on, had morphed into an insurmountable debt. Blackburn charged for everything: the tiny room above the saloon, every meal, laundering her uniforms, even the occasional medicine when she fell ill. The ledger in his office recorded it all, growing rather than shrinking despite her endless hours of work. "I'll find a way," Eleanor insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. "I have to." The afternoon brought no respite as the saloon filled with the usual clientele. Miners fresh from their claims, ranch hands looking to quench their thirst, and travelers passing through on their way to somewhere better. Eleanor moved between tables, delivering drinks and dodging wandering hands with practiced skill. As the sun began to set, painting the distant mountains in brilliant gold and crimson, the saloon doors swung open. Eleanor, balancing a tray of whiskey glasses, barely noticed the newcomer until a hush fell over the room. He stood silhouetted against the fading daylight, tall and broad-shouldered, with the unmistakable bearing of a man comfortable in his own skin. When he stepped further into the saloon, Eleanor could see him clearly. Rugged features weathered by sun and wind, keen eyes the color of a stormy sky, and a quiet confidence that commanded attention without demanding it. "What can I get for you, stranger?" Blackburn called out, his tone noticeably more deferential than usual. The man moved to the bar with the easy grace of a mountain lion. "Whiskey, the good kind you keep under the counter for special guests." His voice was deep with a hint of gravel, his accent suggesting he hailed from somewhere further east. "Coming right up," Blackburn replied, reaching for his premium stock. "Passing through or planning to stay a while? That depends." The stranger's gaze swept the room, pausing briefly on Eleanor before returning to Blackburn. "Name's William York. I'm looking to invest in some property in these parts." Eleanor couldn't help but notice how conversations around the room had quieted, everyone straining to hear the exchange. William York, the name meant nothing to her, but clearly others recognized it. "Well, Mr. York, you've come to the right place," Blackburn said, pouring a generous measure of amber liquid. "Socorro's growing faster than a weed after spring rain. Land values are only going up." York nodded, taking the glass but not drinking immediately. "So I've heard. I'm particularly interested in ranching opportunities. Eleanor continued her work, but found her attention continually drawn to the stranger. There was something different about him, not just his obvious wealth, evident in the quality of his clothing and the fine leather of his boots, but in the way he held himself. Unlike most of Blackburn's customers, he didn't leer at the serving girls or raise his voice to be heard over the piano player. As the evening progressed, Eleanor was assigned to serve the table where York had situated himself, joined now by several local businessmen eager to curry favor. She approached with a fresh bottle of whiskey, careful not to make the same mistake twice. "Another round, gentlemen?" she asked, keeping her eyes downcast as Blackburn had instructed all his girls to do. "Much obliged, miss," York replied, and something in his tone, a simple courtesy so rarely extended to her, made Eleanor look up and meet his gaze directly. For a fleeting moment, she felt as though he could see right through her carefully constructed facade of subservience to the desperation beneath. His eyes, neither pitying nor predatory, held hers with unexpected warmth. "Eleanor," Blackburn's sharp voice broke the moment. "Table 3 needs attending." "Yes, Mr. Blackburn," she replied automatically, hurrying away with burning cheeks. Throughout the evening, Eleanor felt York's gaze follow her occasionally, though never in the unsettling way she'd grown accustomed to from other men. When the saloon finally emptied in the early hours of the morning, leaving only the usual drunks passed out at their tables, she began the tiresome process of cleaning up. "Eleanor." Blackburn's voice stopped her as she gathered empty glasses. "Mr. York will be staying in room 3. Take up fresh water and make sure everything is satisfactory." "Yes, sir," she replied, exhaustion weighing on her like a physical burden. Room 3 was the best accommodation in the building, reserved for wealthy patrons. She trudged up the narrow staircase with a pitcher of water and fresh towels, her feet aching after hours on the saloon floor. Knocking softly on the door, she waited, expecting to be met with drunken demands or worse. Instead, when York opened the door, he appeared perfectly sober and oddly thoughtful. "I apologize for the late hour, Mr. York," she said, offering the pitcher. "Mr. Blackburn asked me to bring fresh water." He accepted it with a nod. "Thank you, miss. Eleanor Vance." "Miss Vance." He said her name as though it mattered, as though she was a person worthy of respect rather than just another serving girl. "I appreciate your attention despite the hour. You must be tired." The simple acknowledgement of her exhaustion nearly undid her. "It's my duty, sir." York studied her for a moment longer, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a coin, a silver dollar that gleamed in the lamplight. "For your trouble," Eleanor's eyes widened. The coin represented more money than she'd been permitted to keep in weeks. "I couldn't, sir. Mr. Blackburn doesn't allow us to accept personal gratuities." "Then Mr. Blackburn need not know," York replied, pressing the coin into her palm and gently closing her fingers around it. "Good night, Miss Vance." "Good night, Mr. York," she whispered, tucking the coin into her hidden pocket before descending the stairs, her mind racing with possibilities. One silver dollar wouldn't erase her debt, but it was something, a tiny spark of hope she hadn't felt in months. The following morning arrived too quickly, bringing with it the usual routine of serving breakfast to overnight guests and cleaning the saloon before it opened for business at noon. Eleanor moved through her tasks mechanically, stealing occasional glances at the staircase, wondering when York would appear. When he finally descended shortly before noon, he was dressed in clean attire that somehow made him stand out even more among the dusty surroundings. He nodded politely to Eleanor as she swept the floor, then made his way to Blackburn's office, knocking once before entering. The door closed behind him, but raised voices soon carried across the empty saloon. Eleanor couldn't make out the words, but the tone suggested heated negotiation. Curiosity getting the better of her, she moved closer under the pretense of dusting the bar. "Absolutely not." Blackburn's voice became clear. "She's contracted to me fair and square." "I've seen your idea of fair," came York's measured reply. "Show me the ledger." There was a pause, followed by the sound of papers being shuffled. Eleanor's heart began to race. They were discussing someone's contract with Blackburn, possibly hers. She pressed closer to the door. $342. York's voice held disbelief. For what? Room and board for a year shouldn't amount to half that. There've been breakages, expenses, medicine when she took sick last winter, Blackburn defended. Plus interest is compounded monthly. It's all there in black and white. It's robbery is what it is, York replied coldly, but I'll pay it. Every cent. Draw up a release of contract immediately. Eleanor nearly dropped her dusting cloth. York was buying someone's contract from Blackburn, but whose? And why? Before she could ponder further, the office door swung open. Blackburn emerged first, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and satisfaction. York followed, his expression unreadable. Eleanor, Blackburn barked. Get in here, now. Confusion and fear tangling in her stomach, Eleanor entered the office. It was a small room dominated by a desk piled with ledgers and papers, the walls lined with shelves holding bottles of liquor too expensive to display in the saloon proper. Sit down, Blackburn ordered, gesturing to the chair opposite his desk. As she complied, he continued, It seems today's your lucky day, girl. Mr. York here has a proposition. Eleanor's eyes darted between the two men, anxiety knotting in her chest. She'd heard stories of girls being sold to wealthy men, their debts transferred from one master to another, often for purposes far worse than serving drinks. What kind of proposition? She managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. York stepped forward, his expression softening. Miss Vance, I'm aware that you've been working to pay off a debt to Mr. Blackburn. I'm prepared to settle that debt in full, releasing you from your contract. Hope and suspicion warred within her. And what would you expect in return, Mr. York? A flicker of what might have been respect passed across his features. Nothing inappropriate, I assure you. I'm establishing a ranch outside of town and require household staff. I'm offering you legitimate employment with actual wages paid weekly, not deductions from an endless debt. Eleanor stared at him in disbelief. You want to hire me as a housekeeper? For now, York confirmed. The position may evolve as the ranch develops. You'd have proper accommodations, regular hours, and Sundays free. Most importantly, you'd be paid fairly for your work. It sounded too good to be true. Eleanor looked to Blackburn, whose expression confirmed he was displeased despite the financial windfall. Mr. Blackburn has agreed to accept payment in full for your debt and release you from any contractual obligations, York continued. The decision, however, is yours. You're under no obligation to accept my offer. Eleanor hesitated, years of disappointment having taught her to distrust sudden good fortune. May I ask why you're doing this, Mr. York? He met her gaze steadily. Because no one should be trapped in servitude disguised as opportunity. I require staff for my new home, and you appear capable and hardworking. It's a business arrangement, Miss Vance, nothing more. Eleanor glanced around the small office where Blackburn had manipulated her future for over a year. What awaited her at York's ranch couldn't possibly be worse than this slow drowning in debt. I accept your offer, Mr. York, she said finally, summoning what dignity she could. When would you like me to begin? Immediately, if possible, he replied. Can you be ready to depart within the hour? Blackburn snorted. She's got nothing worth packing, York. You're getting damaged goods. York's expression hardened as he turned to the saloon owner. I believe that's enough commentary from you. Complete the paperwork while Miss Vance prepares to leave. The next hour passed in a blur. Eleanor gathered her meager possessions, 2 dresses, a nightgown, a hairbrush, and the small silver locket containing a lock of her mother's hair. She changed into her best dress, a simple brown cotton that had once belonged to another serving girl who'd left under mysterious circumstances months earlier. When she descended the stairs with her small bundle, she found York waiting in the now open saloon, several early patrons watching the proceedings with interest. Blackburn stood behind the bar, sullen as he nursed a glass of his own whiskey. Ready? York asked, taking her bundle and offering his arm with a formality that felt foreign after so many months of rough treatment. Eleanor nodded, unable to find words as the reality of her situation sank in. She was leaving the Silver Spur, escaping the endless cycle of debt that had become her prison. The contract's settled, Blackburn, York called over his shoulder as he guided Eleanor toward the door. Miss Vance is no longer in your employ. They stepped out into the bright afternoon sunlight and Eleanor blinked, suddenly overwhelmed. Freedom felt strange, terrifying, and exhilarating all at once. York led her to where a handsome bay gelding was hitched alongside a wagon driven by an older Mexican man. Miss Vance, this is Manuel Ortiz, my foreman, York introduced. Manuel, Miss Eleanor Vance, who will be joining our household. The man touched his hat respectfully. Welcome, Miss Vance. The Senora will be pleased to have female company at last. Eleanor's heart sank slightly. Senora, your wife, Mr. York, York smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. My housekeeper, Mrs. Rosalinda Ortiz, Manuel's wife. She's been complaining about handling the house alone since we began construction. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by confusion at her own reaction. What did it matter if York was married? This was employment, not courtship. York helped her into the wagon beside Manuel, then mounted his horse. We've about an hour's ride ahead. The ranch is northeast of town, toward the foothills. As they pulled away from Socorro's dusty main street, Eleanor couldn't resist looking back at the silver spur. Blackburn stood in the doorway, watching their departure with undisguised resentment. For the first time in over a year, Eleanor felt something like triumph. They traveled through increasingly beautiful country, the desert giving way to more verdant land as they approached the foothills of the mountains. Eleanor, who had barely left the saloon during her time in Socorro, drank in the scenery with eager eyes. How long have you been in New Mexico territory, Mr. York? She asked after they'd been traveling for some time. Just 3 months, he replied, guiding his horse alongside the wagon. I purchased land from a rancher returning east after the Apache troubles subsided. The main house was already standing, though we've made significant improvements. And before that, Colorado primarily, I worked cattle ranches there for several years after the war. He didn't elaborate on which war, but Eleanor assumed he meant the great conflict that had torn the nation apart in her childhood. You're a long way from home, Manuel observed, glancing sideways at her. Most Eastern girls don't come this far west without family. Eleanor stiffened slightly. My family is gone. There was nothing for me in Pennsylvania. York shot Manuel a warning look and the foreman nodded apologetically. My apologies, Miss Vance. I didn't mean to pry. It's all right, she assured him, though the familiar ache of loss throbbed dully in her chest. It's been 5 years now. They continued in companionable silence until the wagon crested a small rise, revealing a valley nestled against the foothills. In the center stood a large adobe and timber house, surrounded by several outbuildings and corrals. Cattle dotted the grassland beyond, and a creek wound through the property, its banks lined with cottonwoods. Welcome to Esperanza, York said, using the Spanish word for hope. It's still a work in progress, but it's coming along. It's beautiful, Eleanor breathed, genuinely impressed. The setting was idyllic compared to the dusty confines of Socorro, and the house itself looked solid and well-maintained. As they approached, a plump woman with graying hair emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Her weathered face broke into a wide smile when she spotted the wagon. Gracias a Dios, you've returned safely, she called, hurrying forward to meet them. Her eyes widened when she noticed Eleanor. And you've brought company, Rosalinda, York said, dismounting. This is Miss Eleanor Vance. She'll be joining us as household help, as we discussed. The older woman's smile grew even warmer as she approached the wagon. Welcome, Miss Eleanor. I have been telling Senor York for weeks that I cannot manage this house alone. Come inside. You must be tired from your journey. Eleanor was overwhelmed by the welcome, so different from the cold reception she'd received at Blackburn's establishment. She allowed Manuel to help her down from the wagon, then followed Rosalinda toward the house. Manuel, see to Miss Vance's things, York called after them. I need to check on the new stock. The interior of the house surprised Eleanor with its comfort and taste. The main room featured solid furniture arranged around a large fireplace with colorful woven rugs softening the wooden floors. Windows allowed ample light and the whole space smelled of beeswax and fresh bread rather than stale beer and tobacco. "Your room is this way," Rosalinda said, leading her down a hallway. "It is small but clean and private, much better than the quarters at that horrible saloon, yes." Eleanor stopped short. "How did you know I worked at a saloon?" Rosalinda's expression grew sympathetic. "Senor York told us he intended to offer employment to a young woman trapped in difficult circumstances. In a town like Socorro, that usually means Blackburn's place. Many girls find themselves unable to leave once they start working there." She opened a door to reveal a modest but pleasant bedroom. A single bed with a colorful quilt stood against one wall, alongside a small dresser. A washstand with pitcher and bowl occupied another corner, and a window overlooked the creek. "This is mine?" Eleanor asked, unable to believe her good fortune. At the Silver Spur, she'd shared a cramped attic room with 3 other girls, sleeping in shifts depending on their working hours. "All yours," Rosalinda confirmed. "Rest now if you wish. Dinner is at 6, and tomorrow I will show you your duties. They will not be too demanding, I promise." Left alone, Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, running her hand over the clean, soft quilt. The events of the day felt dreamlike in their suddenness. Just hours ago, she'd been cleaning Blackburn's floors, seeing no end to her servitude. Now she sat in a lovely room in a beautiful house, offered honest work and dignity she'd nearly forgotten she deserved. And it was all because of William York, a man she knew nothing about beyond his apparent wealth and unexpected kindness. What had motivated him to pay off her debt? Was it truly just a need for household help, or did he have other intentions he hadn't yet revealed? Eleanor unpacked her few possessions, arranging them carefully in the dresser drawers. Whatever York's motives, she decided, she would prove herself valuable through hard work and loyalty. This opportunity, this second chance, was too precious to squander on suspicion. Dinner that evening was a simple but delicious affair of beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie. Eleanor joined York, the Ortizes, and 2 ranch hands named Thomas and Jeremiah at the large kitchen table. The conversation flowed easily, with none of the tense hierarchy she'd grown accustomed to at Blackburn's establishment. "How long have you been working for Mr. York?" Eleanor asked Manuel as they finished their meal. 5 years now," the foreman replied proudly. "Since his first ranch in Colorado, when he decided to move south, he asked if we would come along." "The Ortizes are family, not employees," York interjected from the head of the table. "This ranch wouldn't exist without them." Rosalinda beamed at the praise. "Senor York gives us too much credit." "But it is true, we have been together through difficult times and good ones." Eleanor noted the easy camaraderie between them, respectful but without servility on the Ortizes' part, appreciative without condescension from York. It was unlike any working relationship she'd witnessed before. After dinner, York excused himself to review some paperwork, while the ranch hands returned to the bunkhouse. Eleanor insisted on helping Rosalinda with the dishes despite the older woman's protests. "You must tell me," Rosalinda said quietly as they worked. "How bad was it at Blackburn's place?" Eleanor hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "Not as bad as it could have been. I wasn't forced into certain activities, like some girls, but the debt kept growing no matter how hard I worked. I began to believe I'd never leave." Rosalinda nodded gravely. "Blackburn is known for such practices. Senor York was very angry when he heard about it." "How did he hear about it?" Eleanor asked, curious. "About me specifically, I mean." "He went to the saloon looking for information about local properties," Rosalinda explained. "But he has sharp eyes, that one. He saw how Blackburn treated you when you broke something, heard him threatening to add it to your debt." She shook her head disapprovingly. "Senor York hates injustice more than anything. So he decided to rescue me, just like that." "He is a man of quick decisions once his mind is made up," Rosalinda replied with a fond smile. "But also careful planning. He spoke with the sheriff about Blackburn's practices, but there was nothing illegal about the arrangement. Immoral, yes, but not illegal. So he decided on a different approach." Eleanor absorbed this information thoughtfully. "He paid a great deal of money to free me from my contract. Money means little to him compared to doing what is right," Rosalinda said, hanging the dishcloth to dry. "You will see. He is a good man, Eleanor, one of the best I have known." Later, lying in her comfortable bed listening to the soothing sounds of the creek outside her window, Eleanor reflected on Rosalinda's words. Her instincts told her the housekeeper was sincere, yet years of hard lessons had taught her to be wary of apparent kindness, especially from men. Tomorrow, she decided, she would begin proving her worth through diligent work. Whatever York's true motives, she was determined to repay his investment in her freedom. The following weeks passed in a pleasant routine that gradually eased Eleanor's wariness. Her duties included helping Rosalinda with cooking and cleaning, tending the kitchen garden, and occasionally assisting with mending clothes or linens. The work was steady but never overwhelming, and true to his word, York paid her weekly wages in cash, more money than she'd been permitted to handle in over a year. York himself remained something of a mystery. He was often away from the ranch, meeting with neighboring ranchers or traveling to Socorro on business. When present, he was unfailingly polite but maintained a certain reserve. He took most meals with the household, joining in the conversation but rarely revealing much about himself. Eleanor found herself watching him when she thought he wouldn't notice, trying to reconcile the man who had so generously purchased her freedom with the guarded rancher, who seemed to hold part of himself apart from everyone around him. The boss was a cavalry officer during the war, Thomas, one of the ranch hands, told her one afternoon as she delivered fresh water to the men repairing a corral fence. Fought for the Union. Doesn't talk about it much, but Manuel says he came west afterward because he couldn't stomach going home to Philadelphia. Philadelphia? Eleanor asked, surprised to learn York hailed from so close to her own hometown. That's the story. Comes from money, obviously, but prefers to make his own way. Started as a regular cowhand in Colorado before building up enough to buy his own spread. This glimpse into York's past intrigued Eleanor, but opportunities to learn more were limited by their respective positions and his frequent absences. Then, nearly a month after her arrival at Esperanza, everything changed. Eleanor was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when the sound of approaching riders caught her attention. York wasn't expected back from Socorro until the following day, and Manuel had taken the wagon to a neighboring ranch to trade for some equipment. Shading her eyes against the bright afternoon sun, she spotted 3 riders approaching from the direction of town. As they drew closer, her blood ran cold. In the lead, unmistakable despite the distance, was Silas Blackburn. She dropped the damp shirt she'd been about to hang and hurried into the house. "Rosalinda," she called urgently. "Riders coming, and one is Mr. Blackburn." The housekeeper emerged from the pantry, flour dusting her hands. "Blackburn here, what business could he possibly have?" "I don't know," Eleanor replied, her heart racing, "but I have a bad feeling about it." Rosalinda wiped her hands on her apron. "Stay inside, I will speak with them." "No," Eleanor said, summoning her courage. "Whatever he wants, it concerns me, I won't hide." They walked out to the front of the house together as the riders approached. Blackburn was accompanied by 2 men Eleanor recognized as regulars from the Silver Spur Rough characters who occasionally worked as hired muscle when Blackburn needed to enforce his will. "Well, well," Blackburn called as they reined in their horses. "If it isn't the runaway serving girl, enjoying your new position, Eleanor." Eleanor lifted her chin. "What do you want, Mr. Blackburn? Mr. York isn't here." "That's convenient," Blackburn replied, dismounting heavily. "Because my business is with you, not York." Rosalinda stepped slightly in front of Eleanor. "This is private property, senor. You are not welcome here." Blackburn ignored her, focusing on Eleanor. "Seems there was a discrepancy in our accounting. York didn't pay your full debt after all." "That's a lie," Eleanor replied, her voice stronger than she felt. "I was there when he paid every cent you claimed I owed. Ah, but you weren't there later when I discovered additional expenses." He pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket, another $100 to be exact. "And since York's not here to settle up, I figure you'll just have to come back with me until he returns." One of Blackburn's companions dismounted, moving to stand beside his employer with a menacing grin. "Boss is being generous. offering to let you work it off instead of involving the law. There is no debt, Eleanor insisted, though fear crawled up her spine. Mr. York has the receipt and contract of release with his signature and yours. Papers can be disputed, Blackburn shrugged. Now, are you coming peacefully, or do we need to make this difficult? Rosalinda suddenly darted back into the house, calling over her shoulder, "Run, Eleanor." To the barn. Eleanor hesitated only a moment before following Rosalinda's advice, gathering her skirts and sprinting toward the large barn where the horses were kept. Behind her, she heard cursing and the sound of pursuit. She reached the barn and slipped inside, frantically looking for a place to hide or a weapon to defend herself. The building was dimly lit, the air heavy with the scent of hay and horses. She moved deeper inside, considering whether she could mount one of the horses and outride her pursuers. "Eleanor," Blackburn's voice echoed from just outside, "don't make this worse for yourself, girl. You know I'll find you." Footsteps approached the barn door. Eleanor backed away, her hand closing around a pitchfork leaning against a stall. She raised it defensively as the door creaked open. "There you are," Blackburn said, stepping into the barn with his companion close behind. "Put that down before you hurt yourself." "Stay away from me," Eleanor warned, keeping the pitchfork leveled at them. "I'm not going anywhere with you," Blackburn sighed theatrically. "Hendricks, take that away from her." The larger man started forward but froze at the distinctive click of a pistol being cocked. "I wouldn't," came a familiar deep voice from the shadows at the rear of the barn. William York stepped into view, a revolver held steadily in his hand. His clothes were travel-stained, his expression cold with controlled fury. "York," Blackburn spat, "this doesn't concern you." "A trespasser on my property attempting to abduct my employee most certainly concerns me," York replied evenly. "Step away from Miss Vance, now." Hendricks raised his hands slowly, backing toward Blackburn, who remained defiant. "She owes me money." $100 that wasn't included in our settlement." "You lie as easily as you breathe, Blackburn," York said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Our contract was comprehensive and final. Miss Vance owes you nothing." "It'll be my word against yours if this goes to court," Blackburn threatened. "And I've got witnesses who'll swear to the additional debt." York's laugh held no humor. "You're welcome to test that theory. Sheriff Martinez might be interested in reviewing all your accounting practices while he's at it. I'm sure your other girls would have fascinating stories to tell." Uncertainty flickered across Blackburn's face for the first time. "You're bluffing. Martinez looks the other way. For small infractions, perhaps, but kidnapping, false imprisonment, fraud, those are territorial matters, not local ones." York took a step forward. "How many girls have you trapped in debt over the years, Blackburn? How many would testify against you if given the chance?" Eleanor saw the calculation in Blackburn's eyes as he weighed his options. Finally, he jerked his head toward the door. "Come on, Hendricks, it's not worth the trouble." "One moment," York said as they turned to leave. "Empty your pockets first." "What? You heard me. I want to see what else you've brought onto my property uninvited." Cursing under his breath, Blackburn reached into his coat and produced a small revolver which he tossed onto the ground. Hendricks did the same with a knife. "Now get out," York ordered. "And understand this clearly, if you ever approach Miss Vance again, if you so much as speak her name in public, I will ruin you. Not with violence, but with the law and with money, both of which I have in greater supply than you." The threat, delivered with quiet certainty, visibly unnerved Blackburn. He backed toward the door. "This isn't over, York. For your sake, it had better be." After they left, Eleanor lowered the pitchfork, her hands trembling with delayed fear and relief. "I thought you weren't due back until tomorrow." "I finished my business early," York replied, holstering his weapon. "Fortunate timing." "Yes," Eleanor agreed softly. "Thank you again for saving me." York's stern expression softened as he looked at her. "Are you all right? Did they harm you?" "No, I'm fine, just shaken." She took a deep breath. How much of that was true, about being able to bring charges against Blackburn? "Enough to worry him," York replied. "Sheriff Martinez might look the other way on some matters, but he's not entirely corrupt. And territorial officials would certainly take interest in a pattern of fraud and exploitation." He paused, studying her face. But that's not your concern. Blackburn won't trouble you again. How can you be so sure? Because men like Blackburn only understand two things: power and consequences. I've demonstrated I have the former and am willing to deliver the latter. He offered his arm. Come, Rosalinda is probably worried sick. They found the housekeeper outside the barn, armed with a shotgun and accompanied by the third ranch hand who'd been working in a distant field when Blackburn arrived. Gracias a Dios, Rosalinda breathed, lowering the weapon when she saw them emerge unharmed. Senor York, I sent Jeremiah to find you as soon as I saw who was approaching. You did well, York assured her. All of you did. His gaze returned to Eleanor, something unreadable in his expression, though I think perhaps we should discuss additional security measures given today's events. That evening, after a quiet dinner during which Eleanor was still too unsettled to eat much, York asked her to join him in his study, a room she had cleaned, but where they'd never had occasion to speak privately before. The space reflected York's character, orderly but comfortable, with bookshelves lining one wall and a large desk positioned to capture the best light from the windows. Maps of the territory were spread across one table, marked with notations about water sources and grazing areas. Please sit, he invited, gesturing to a chair near the fireplace. Eleanor perched on the edge of the seat, suddenly nervous. Is something wrong? Nothing new, York replied, taking the opposite chair. But today's incident has made me realize we need to address your situation more permanently. Her heart sank. After everything, was he sending her away? I understand if you feel my presence brings trouble to Esperanza, she began. What? No, York interrupted, looking genuinely surprised. That's not at all what I meant. Then what did you mean? He leaned forward, clasping his hands together. Eleanor, Miss Vance, your position here has always been intended as a transition, a safe place where you could regain your footing after escaping Blackburn's exploitation. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. But as long as you remain an employee, there's a vulnerability that men like Blackburn might try to exploit. Eleanor frowned, not understanding. What alternative is there? Several, York replied. You could take your savings, which I know you've been carefully accumulating, and travel to a larger city where Blackburn has no influence. Denver, perhaps, or even San Francisco. With references from me, you could secure respectable employment. The thought of leaving Esperanza, which had become a sanctuary in such a short time, sent a pang through Eleanor's chest. And if I don't wish to leave, something flickered in York's eyes, hope, perhaps. Then we could consider a more permanent arrangement. One that would offer you greater protection under the law. Eleanor's breath caught as his meaning dawned on her. Mr. York, are you proposing marriage? He held her gaze steadily. I am, though I realize it must seem sudden and perhaps opportunistic given today's events. Why? She asked, genuinely perplexed. You could marry any woman in the territory, someone from your own social circle with wealth and connections. I have wealth and connections enough for both of us, he replied simply. What I lack is a partner who understands the value of freedom because she's known its absence, someone with courage and resilience who doesn't flinch from hard work or hard truths. Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks at the unexpected praise. You hardly know me. I know enough, York said. I've watched you these past weeks. Seen how quickly you adapted to life here, how kind you are to Rosalinda, how you never complained despite having every right to be bitter after your experiences. He paused, a rare vulnerability crossing his features. But perhaps I'm presuming too much. If you find the idea repellent, I don't, Eleanor interrupted quickly, surprising herself with her vehemence. It's just unexpected. I never imagined you might think of me that way. York smiled slightly. To be completely honest, neither did I when I first offered you employment. But living in the same house, seeing you each day. He trailed off, then straightened. I should be clear, this wouldn't be merely a marriage of convenience. I admire you greatly, Eleanor. I believe we could build something meaningful together, given time and mutual respect. Eleanor's mind raced. Was this really happening? Just months ago, she'd been trapped in what amounted to indentured servitude, with no hope of escape. Now this man, this kind, honorable man who had already rescued her twice, was offering her his name, his protection, and apparently his heart. "May I have time to consider?" she asked finally. "This is overwhelming, of course," York replied immediately. "Take all the time you need. Whether your answer is yes or no, your position here is secure." He rose, signaling the end of their conversation. "I meant what I said about respecting you, Eleanor. I won't press you for an answer before you're ready to give one." Eleanor stood as well, suddenly hyper-aware of his proximity and the intensity of his gaze. "Thank you for understanding, and for the offer, regardless of my decision." He nodded once, then stepped back to allow her to pass. "Good night, Eleanor." "Good night, William," she replied, using his given name for the first time. As she walked back to her room, Eleanor felt as though she were floating above the floorboards, disconnected from reality. William York, the man who had rescued her from Blackburn's clutches, who owned thousands of acres and commanded respect throughout the territory, wanted to marry her, Eleanor Vance, a penniless orphan who had been serving drinks in a second-rate saloon just weeks earlier. It seemed impossible. Like something from a dime novel rather than real life. And yet, his sincerity had been unmistakable. Over the next several days, Eleanor considered York's proposal from every angle. She spoke with Rosalinda, who admitted she had suspected York's growing feelings but had said nothing out of respect for both their privacy. "He watches you when you aren't looking," the housekeeper confided. Not in the way men at the saloon would have watched, but with admiration and tenderness. "I have known Senor York for 5 years and never seen him look at any woman this way." "But is affection enough reason to marry?" Eleanor asked, voicing her deepest concern. "I respect and admire him immensely. I'm even attracted to him. But love, I don't know if what I feel is love." Rosalinda patted her hand gently. "Sometimes love grows slowly like a garden. You plant seeds of respect and kindness, water them with shared experiences, and one day you look up to find something beautiful has bloomed." She smiled. "Besides, many marriages begin with far less." Eleanor knew this was true. Most women in her position would jump at such an advantageous match without a second thought. York was offering security, respectability, and the promise of gentle treatment more than she had dared hope for when planning her future. And yet, something held her back from immediate acceptance. Perhaps it was fear of another form of dependency or lingering doubts about his motives despite his apparent sincerity. Then, 1 week after his proposal, everything changed again. Eleanor was returning from the garden with a basket of vegetables for dinner when she heard raised voices from the direction of the corral. Curious, she set down her basket and moved closer. York stood facing 3 men on horseback, his posture rigid with tension. With a jolt, Eleanor recognized the rider in the center, Henry Blackwood, a wealthy landowner from the eastern part of the territory who had occasionally visited the Silver Spur with his associates. He was known for his ruthlessness in business dealings and his disdain for those he considered beneath him. "You're trespassing, Blackwood," York was saying, his voice carrying clearly in the still afternoon air. "State your business or leave." Blackwood, a portly man with a florid complexion and expensive clothes that seemed out of place on the frontier, smiled unpleasantly. "Just a friendly visit between neighbors, York. No need for hostility." "We're not neighbors, and this isn't a social call," York replied coldly. "What do you want?" "Direct as always," Blackwood chuckled. "Very well, I've come to make you an offer for this property, a generous one considering the circumstances." Eleanor edged closer, staying hidden behind the corner of the barn. "This land isn't for sale," York stated flatly. "Not to you or anyone else." Blackwood's smile faded. "Don't be hasty. My offer is 20% above what you paid Barrett for the place. You'd walk away with a tidy profit for just 3 months' work. Not interested?" "You will be," Blackwood insisted, his tone hardening, "when you understand the alternative." York's hand drifted closer to his holstered pistol. "Is that a threat, Blackwood?" "A reality," the other man replied. "This valley is the only viable route for the railroad spur I'm building to connect my mining operations to the main line. I need this land, York, and I intend to have it one way or another. The railroad's planned route is 10 miles south of here, York countered. We both know that, Blackwood shrugged. Routes can change when the right people are persuaded, and I'm very persuasive. With bribes, you mean? With whatever works, Blackwood admitted shamelessly. The point is, you can profit from this situation or suffer from it. Your choice. York's voice dropped dangerously low. I fought men like you during the war, Blackwood men who believed their wealth entitled them to whatever they wanted, regardless of who got hurt. I didn't yield to them then, and I won't yield to you now. The confrontation had drawn the attention of Manuel and the ranch hands, who were now approaching from various directions, subtly positioning themselves to support York if needed. Blackwood noted their arrival with a dismissive glance. Consider my offer, York. You have 1 week. He gathered his reins. After that, things might become difficult for you and your people. With that, he wheeled his horse and rode away, his companions following closely. Eleanor stepped out from her hiding place as York turned toward the house, his face tight with controlled anger. How much of that did you hear? He asked when he spotted her. Enough, she replied, falling into step beside him. Will he really cause trouble? York sighed heavily. Blackwood doesn't make idle threats. He wants this land for his railroad, and he's used to getting what he wants. What will you do? Fight him if necessary. He glanced down at her, his expression softening slightly. I won't surrender Esperanza, not to Blackwood, not to anyone. The fierce determination in his voice stirred something in Eleanor's chest. Admiration, certainly, but also something deeper and more personal. I wouldn't expect you to, she said quietly. This is your home, our home. York stopped walking, turning to face her fully. Our home. He repeated, a question in his voice. Eleanor met his gaze steadily, suddenly certain of her decision. Yes, if your proposal still stands, my answer is yes, I'll marry you, William. For a moment, he simply stared at her, as though unsure he'd heard correctly. Then his face transformed with a smile of such genuine joy that it took her breath away. Are you certain? He asked, taking her hands in his. I don't want you accepting out of fear or obligation after what you just witnessed. I'm accepting because I respect you, admire you, and believe we can build a good life together, Eleanor replied honestly. Blackwood's threats only confirmed what I already knew about your character, that you stand up for what's right. Protect what you care about, and don't back down from bullies, whether they're saloon owners or wealthy industrialists. William's smile deepened as he raised one hand to gently touch her cheek. May I kiss you, Eleanor, now that we're properly engaged? Heat rushed to her face, but she nodded. Yes. His lips met hers with surprising gentleness, a question rather than a demand, an invitation rather than a claim. Eleanor found herself responding with unexpected eagerness, her hands moving to his shoulders as the kiss deepened. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, William rested his forehead against hers. I promise to be a good husband to you, Eleanor. To respect you as an equal partner, not a possession. And I promise to stand beside you, she replied softly, whatever challenges we face. Neither could have predicted just how quickly those challenges would arrive. The following day, William rode into Socorro to speak with Sheriff Martinez about Blackwood's threats and to arrange for the marriage license. Eleanor busied herself with household tasks, unable to contain her smile each time she thought of their engagement. You look happy, Rosalinda observed as they prepared lunch together. It suits you. I am happy, Eleanor admitted. Happier than I ever expected to be again after my parents died. Senor York William is a fortunate man, the housekeeper said warmly, and you deserve every happiness, Nina. Their peaceful afternoon was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses, many more than usual. Eleanor moved to the window, her stomach tightening with apprehension as she counted 6 riders approaching the house, none of whom were William. It's Blackwood again, she told Rosalinda. With more men this time, the housekeeper's expression hardened. Manuel and the boys are checking the north pasture fences. We are alone, Eleanor's mind raced. We need to warn them. Can we signal somehow? The rifle, Rosalinda decided, moving quickly to where a shotgun was kept above the door. 3 shots in the air is our signal for trouble. She stepped onto the porch and fired 3 times in rapid succession, the sound echoing across the valley. Then she moved back inside, reloading swiftly. "They will come," she assured Eleanor, "but it may take time. We must handle this ourselves until then." The riders pulled up in front of the house, Blackwood in the lead. Unlike his previous visit, his men were openly armed, rifles resting across their saddles. "Ladies," Blackwood called, removing his hat with mocking courtesy. "Is York about?" "Senor York is not here," Rosalinda replied, the shotgun visible but not directly aimed. "This is private property, Mr. Blackwood. You were told yesterday that you are not welcome." Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I was hoping to continue our discussion in a more productive manner. When do you expect him back?" Eleanor stepped forward. "Mr. York's schedule is none of your concern. Please leave immediately." Recognition dawned in Blackwood's expression. "Well, if it isn't Eleanor Vance from the Silver Spur. Moving up in the world, aren't you? First York's housekeeper, and now, what exactly? His mistress." "His fiancée," Eleanor corrected, lifting her chin despite the fear churning in her stomach. "Now state your business or leave, as you've been asked twice already." Blackwood's eyebrows rose. "Fiancé, my, York certainly works quickly." He dismounted, ignoring Rosalinda's warning step forward. How convenient that he found himself a ready-made wife right here in Socorro. One who's already indebted to him for her liberation. "You know nothing about us," Eleanor said steadily, though his words struck uncomfortably close to her own initial doubts. "I know more than you might think, Miss Vance," Blackwood replied, his voice hardening. "I know York purchased your contract from Blackburn. I know he set himself up as your savior, and I know men like him don't marry saloon girls unless they have something to gain." "That is enough," Rosalinda interjected sharply, raising the shotgun. "You will leave now, or I will consider you intruders and act accordingly." Blackwood glanced at the weapon, then at his armed companions, clearly calculating the odds. "There's no need for unpleasantness. I merely came to deliver a message for York since he refused my generous offer yesterday." "What message?" Eleanor asked, despite Rosalinda's warning look, that his stubbornness has consequences. Blackwood gestured to his men. "Burn the south hayfield and take 2 of the best horses from the corral. Consider it a down payment on the trouble he's buying by defying me." "No." Eleanor exclaimed, starting forward, but Rosalinda grabbed her arm. "Stay back," the housekeeper warned. "They are armed and we are 2 women alone." "Wise advice," Blackwood smirked. "Listen to her, Miss Vance. This is just business, unpleasant perhaps, but nothing personal." Eleanor watched in helpless fury as 3 of Blackwood's men rode toward the hayfield, while 2 others approached the corral where several of William's prized horses were kept. The dry hay would burn quickly in the summer heat, and the horses represented a significant investment. "When William returns," she began, but Blackwood cut her off. "When York returns, he'll understand that I'm serious about acquiring this land. The cost of resistance will only increase. Today it's hay and horses. Tomorrow," he shrugged eloquently, "who knows? Perhaps his precious fiancée might find herself in danger." The threat, thinly veiled, sent ice through Eleanor's veins, but before she could respond, a gunshot cracked across the yard, kicking up dust at Blackwood's feet. "Step away from my house and my women," William's voice rang out as he rode into view, rifle in hand. Behind him came Manuel and the ranch hands, all armed and grim-faced. Blackwood raised his hands slowly, his smug expression faltering slightly. "York. Just in time to see what defying me costs you." In the distance, smoke began to rise from the south hayfield, and the sound of frightened horses carried from the corral. William's face was like stone as he dismounted, keeping his rifle trained on Blackwood. "You've made a serious mistake coming here like this." "Have I?" Blackwood challenged. "You're outnumbered, York, even with your Mexican and those boys. My men are already carrying out my orders. The question is how much more damage you're willing to sustain before you see reason." William's gaze flicked briefly to Eleanor, assessing that she was unharmed before returning to Blackwood. "Manuel," he said calmly, "take Miss Vance and Mrs. Ortiz inside, then help the boys contain the fire." "She, patron," Manuel replied, moving to usher the women toward the house. Eleanor hesitated. "William, please, Eleanor," he said, his voice gentler but still firm. "I need to know you're safe." She nodded reluctantly and allowed Manuel to guide her inside, though she remained near the window where she could observe what happened next. Once they were out of immediate danger, William advanced on Blackwood, his rifle unwavering. "I won't tell you again to get off my land." "Or what?" Blackwood sneered. "You'll shoot me, an unarmed man? I think not. You're too bound by your precious honor for that." "You're right," William agreed unexpectedly. "I won't shoot an unarmed man." In one swift motion, he reversed his grip on the rifle and struck Blackwood across the face with the stock, sending the older man sprawling in the dust. But there are other ways to deal with vermin. Blood streaming from his split lip, Blackwood scrambled backward. "You'll regret that," he sputtered. "My men are surrendering," William finished for him, gesturing to where Thomas and Jeremiah had returned from the corral with Blackwood's men at gunpoint. In the distance, the other ranch hand was already fighting the fire, which appeared to be under control. "And you're leaving now before I forget my honor entirely." Blackwood rose unsteadily, wiping blood from his face. His earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by naked hatred. "This isn't over, York." "Yes, it is," William replied coldly. "Because if you ever threaten my ranch or my people again, I won't stop with bloodying your face. Now get on your horse and ride out while you still can." Under the watchful eyes of William and his men, Blackwood and his companions mounted and departed, the two who had been captured riding with their hands bound to their saddle horns. As soon as they were gone, Eleanor rushed out to meet William. "Are you all right?" He nodded, his expression softening as he looked at her. "I'm fine, but I shouldn't have left you and Rosalinda alone, knowing Blackwood might return." "We handled ourselves well enough," she assured him, though relief at his return made her knees weak. "The fire is small and containable," he finished. "The hay was still green enough that it's not burning easily. As for the horses, they didn't manage to take any before our return." His face darkened. "But Blackwood has shown his hand now. He won't stop with this failure." "What will we do?" Eleanor asked, unconsciously using we rather than you. William noticed, a small smile briefly lifting the corner of his mouth despite the gravity of the situation. "We'll prepare, and we'll accelerate our plans." He took her hands in his. "How do you feel about getting married tomorrow instead of waiting for the proper announcement period?" Eleanor blinked in surprise. "Tomorrow? Is that even possible?" "I spoke with both Sheriff Martinez and Padre Ignacio this morning," William explained. "Given the circumstances with Blackwood and his threats, they're willing to expedite matters. The license is approved and the Padre can perform the ceremony whenever we're ready." The idea of becoming William's wife so quickly both thrilled and terrified Eleanor. They'd only just become engaged, and part of her had been looking forward to a proper courtship period, brief though it might be. Yet the practical advantages of immediate marriage were undeniable, especially with Blackwood's threats hanging over them. "If you need more time," William began, misinterpreting her hesitation. "No," Eleanor interrupted. "Tomorrow is perfect. The sooner we're officially husband and wife, the better." His smile warmed his entire face. "I couldn't agree more." The following morning dawned clear and brilliant, the sky an endless blue canopy stretching over Socorro County. Eleanor stood before the small mirror in her room, hardly recognizing the woman who looked back at her. Rosalinda had worked miracles with the only good dress Eleanor possessed, a simple blue cotton that had been hastily altered to serve as a wedding gown. Tiny wildflowers were woven into her upswept hair, and around her neck hung a delicate silver pendant that had been Rosalinda's own wedding gift decades earlier. "Something borrowed," the housekeeper had said with tears in her eyes as she fastened the clasp, "for luck and blessings in your marriage." A soft knock at the door pulled Eleanor from her thoughts. "Come in." Manuel entered, dressed in his Sunday best, his weathered face solemn yet pleased. "It is time, Miss Eleanor. The wagon is ready to take us to the church." Eleanor nodded, smoothing her skirts nervously. "How does William seem?" "Is he anxious?" Manuel's expression softened. "He is like a man who cannot believe his good fortune. When he looks for you each time the door opens, his entire face lights up. The simple observation eased Eleanor's nerves considerably. Whatever complications had brought them together, her desperate circumstances, Blackburn's exploitation, William's intervention, the feelings developing between them felt genuine and precious. The small adobe church in Socorro was filled with more people than Eleanor had expected. Besides the ranch household, several neighboring ranchers and their families had come, along with a few townspeople who knew William through his business dealings. Padre Ignacio, a kindly older man with twinkling eyes, waited at the altar beside William, who stood tall and handsome in a new black suit. As Eleanor entered on Manuel's arm, the foreman having offered to stand in place of her father, William turned to watch her approach. The naked emotion on his face, wonder, tenderness, and something that looked remarkably like love made Eleanor's heart swell with answering feeling. This man, who had rescued her from servitude and offered her not just safety but partnership, was about to become her husband. The journey from Blackburn's saloon to this moment seemed both impossibly long and startlingly brief. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of traditional words and solemn promises. Eleanor spoke her vows clearly, meaning every word as she pledged herself to William. When he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, one he must have purchased during his trip to town the previous day, the physical symbol of their union brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Padre Ignacio declared with evident satisfaction. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." William's kiss was gentle but held a promise of deeper passion to come, appropriate to their public setting yet thrillingly intimate. As they turned to face their small gathering of witnesses, now officially Mr. and Mrs. William York, Eleanor felt a sense of rightness settle over her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, from Blackwood's threats to the ordinary difficulties of marriage, they would face them together. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful, held in the town's only hotel dining room. Wine flowed freely, music was played by local musicians, and for a few precious hours the shadow of Blackwood's threats receded in the face of communal goodwill. "Mrs. York," William murmured in her ear as they shared a quiet moment between well-wishers. "How does it sound?" "Wonderful," Eleanor admitted, leaning slightly against his solid presence. "Though I'm still getting used to it." "We have a lifetime for that," he replied, his arm tightening around her waist. "A lifetime I intend to fill with happiness for you." Eleanor turned to face him fully, emboldened by both wine and her new status. "And what about your happiness, William? What can I do to ensure that?" His eyes darkened slightly as they moved over her face. "You've already begun by agreeing to be my wife, the rest." He smiled, the expression both tender and heated. "The rest we'll discover together." The implications of what awaited them that night sent warmth flooding through Eleanor's body. Despite her years working in a saloon, she remained innocently inexperienced in physical intimacy. The prospect of sharing William's bed both excited and intimidated her. As if reading her thoughts, he brushed a gentle kiss against her temple. "There's no rush for anything, Eleanor. We have time." His consideration only deepened her growing feelings for him. "Thank you," she whispered, "for understanding without my having to explain." Their private moment was interrupted by Sheriff Martinez approaching with a concerned expression. "York, a word if you don't mind." William frowned slightly but nodded. "Excuse me a moment," he told Eleanor before stepping aside with the sheriff. Eleanor watched their conversation from across the room, noting how William's expression grew increasingly grave. When he returned to her side, the joy of minutes earlier had been replaced by tension. "What is it?" she asked quietly. "Blackwood's men have been seen in town, heavily armed," William replied, keeping his voice low to avoid alarming other guests. "The sheriff thinks they're planning something, but he doesn't have enough deputies to intervene without cause." Fear clutched at Eleanor's heart. "Should we return to Esperanza?" William considered briefly, then shook his head. "That might be exactly what they're hoping for to catch us on the road. We've arranged to stay at the hotel tonight as planned. The sheriff will post extra watches and will return to the ranch with additional men tomorrow." Eleanor nodded, trusting his judgment despite her anxiety. At least we're legally married now. Blackwood can't use my status against us anymore. That was always a minor concern compared to his determination to acquire Esperanza, William admitted. But yes, I'm glad we've removed even that potential vulnerability. His expression softened as he looked down at her. And far more importantly, I'm glad you're my wife, Eleanor York. The way he said her new name sent a shiver of pleasure through her. As am I, husband. The celebration continued for another hour before William and Eleanor made their excuses, retiring to the hotel's best suite amid good-natured teasing from their well-wishers. Once alone, a sudden shyness fell between them, the reality of their new intimacy now unavoidable. Would you like me to step out while you prepare for bed? William offered, gesturing to the small adjoining dressing room. Eleanor nodded gratefully. Yes, please, I won't be long. With trembling fingers, she changed into the simple white nightgown Rosalinda had helped her finish just that morning. It was modest by design, yet somehow felt revealing in its purpose. She brushed out her hair, letting it fall in waves down her back, then took a deep breath before opening the door. William had removed his jacket, vest, and boots, but remained otherwise dressed. He turned at the sound of the door, his eyes widening slightly as they traveled over her. You're beautiful, he said simply, the words carrying the weight of absolute conviction. Eleanor blushed but held his gaze. Thank you. He crossed to her slowly, giving her time to retreat if she wished. When she remained in place, he reached out to touch her cheek with gentle fingers. I meant what I said earlier. There's no rush, Eleanor. We can simply rest tonight if you prefer. The tenderness in his voice, the careful respect in his touch dissolved Eleanor's remaining nervousness. This was William, her husband, who had never been anything but honorable in his treatment of her. I don't wish to wait, she admitted softly, but I should tell you that I've never. That is, despite working in a saloon, I haven't. I know, he assured her, understanding immediately, and I'm honored by your trust. He bent to kiss her, a slow exploration rather than a demand, his hands remaining chastely at her waist until she tentatively raised her arms to encircle his neck. What followed was a gentle initiation into physical love, with William guiding Eleanor through unfamiliar territory with patience and care. His every touch was a question, waiting for her response before proceeding further. When discomfort briefly clouded her pleasure, he slowed immediately, whispering reassurances until her body adjusted to this new intimacy. Afterward, lying in the circle of his arms with her head pillowed on his chest, Eleanor felt a profound sense of belonging. This was what had been missing from her life since losing her parents, not just security or companionship, but the bone-deep knowledge that she was cherished. Are you all right? William asked softly, his fingers combing through her hair in a soothing rhythm. Better than all right, she replied truthfully. I never imagined marriage could feel like this. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. Like what? Like coming home after being lost for a very long time. His arms tightened around her. That's exactly how it feels to me as well. They fell asleep tangled together, the sounds of Socorro's nightlife a distant backdrop to their newfound closeness. Morning brought sunshine streaming through the hotel window and a gentle knock at their door. William, already dressed, answered to find one of the ranch hands outside. Sorry to disturb you, boss, Thomas said, his expression anxious, but there's trouble. Blackwood's men rode out to Esperanza last night. Manuel and the others drove them off, but not before they set fire to the barn. Eleanor, who had hastily pulled on her robe at the sound of the knock, gasped in dismay. Was anyone hurt? No, madam, Thomas assured her, and they managed to save the horses, but the barn's mostly gone and they threatened worse when they left. William's face hardened. Get the wagon ready. We're returning immediately. Within the hour, they were headed back to Esperanza, accompanied by Thomas, another ranch hand, and two friends from neighboring properties who had volunteered additional protection. Eleanor, still glowing from their wedding night despite the troubling news, found herself watching William's profile as he drove the wagon, admiring the determination evident in every line of his body. We'll rebuild, she said quietly, together. He glanced at her, his expression softening momentarily. Yes, we will, but first we need to deal with Blackwood once and for all. This has gone beyond business rivalry into something much more dangerous. What do you have in mind? William hesitated, clearly weighing how much to share. I've been gathering evidence of Blackwood's illegal activities for weeks, bribes to officials, intimidation of smaller ranchers, even suspected involvement in rustling operations. Sheriff Martinez has been reluctant to act without solid proof, but last night's attack changes things. Will it be enough? Eleanor asked, concerned. From what I've seen, Blackwood has considerable influence. Money buys influence, but not immunity, William replied grimly. Especially not for arson and attempted murder. If Martinez won't act, I'll take the evidence to the territorial governor himself. They arrived at Esperanza to find the ranch hands and Rosalinda already clearing debris from the burned barn. The smell of charred wood hung heavy in the air, and the normally peaceful atmosphere of the ranch was tainted with tension. Gracias, adios, you're back safely, Manuel said, embracing William briefly before nodding respectfully to Eleanor. We were worried they might attack you in town. The sheriff kept watch, William assured him. How bad is the damage? Manuel gestured toward the blackened skeleton of what had been the main barn. The structure is lost, but we saved most of the contents and all the animals. They tried to set fire to the corral fences too, but the wood was too green to catch properly. William surveyed the destruction, his expression grim but determined. We'll start rebuilding immediately, but first I need to send messages to our neighbors. Blackwood has crossed a line that affects everyone in this valley. It's time we presented a united front. Over the next 2 days, a stream of local ranchers and farmers visited Esperanza, each leaving with a greater understanding of the threat Blackwood posed to all their livelihoods. By the 3rd day, William had organized a coalition of landowners representing nearly 30,000 acres, a significant political force in the territory. Through it all, Eleanor stood beside her husband, offering quiet support and practical assistance. She served meals to the visiting ranchers, kept records of pledged support, and in the evenings, provided William with the emotional anchor he needed to continue his campaign against Blackwood's intimidation. Their nights together deepened their connection, physical intimacy reinforcing the growing bonds of trust and affection between them. Eleanor found herself falling more deeply in love with William with each passing day, admiring his integrity and determination, even as she discovered the tender vulnerability he showed only to her. 1 week after their wedding, William rode to Socorro with a delegation of ranchers to present their evidence against Blackwood to both Sheriff Martinez and a territorial judge who happened to be in town on circuit. Eleanor remained at Esperanza, overseeing the ongoing barn reconstruction and trying to distract herself from worry. She was in the kitchen garden with Rosalinda when Manuel shouted a warning from his lookout position near the house. 4 riders were approaching not from the direction of Socorro but from the hills to the north. Inside, quickly, Rosalinda urged, grabbing Eleanor's arm. It could be Blackwood's men again. They hurried toward the house, but before they reached it, the riders came into clear view. Eleanor's steps faltered as she recognized Blackwood himself in the lead, rifle in hand. Mrs. Ortiz, Mrs. York, Manuel called from the porch, his own rifle raised. Inside now, but it was too late. Blackwood had spotted them and veered his horse directly toward the women, cutting off their path to the house. His companions spread out, effectively surrounding them. Mrs. York, Blackwood called mockingly, reining in his horse, my congratulations on your recent marriage. Though I fear you may be a widow sooner than expected. Fear clutched at Eleanor's heart, but she kept her voice steady. What have you done to my husband? Nothing yet, Blackwood replied with false pleasantness. But he's made a nuisance of himself in Socorro today, stirring up trouble with his so-called evidence. I thought it prudent to secure some insurance against any hasty legal actions. Eleanor understood immediately. You mean to take me hostage? How perceptive, Blackwood smiled coldly. Your husband values you highly, that much is obvious. I believe he'll abandon his crusade against me in exchange for your safe return." Behind him, his men had dismounted and were approaching with weapons drawn. Manuel remained on the porch, his rifle aimed but useless against such numbers. Eleanor's mind raced. She couldn't allow herself to become leverage against William, not when he was finally taking action that might end Blackwood's reign of terror in the valley. "Rosalinda," she whispered urgently, "when I move, run for the house." The housekeeper shook her head minutely. "I will not leave you, Nina. You must," Eleanor insisted. "Someone has to tell William what happened." Before Rosalinda could argue further, Eleanor did the last thing Blackwood would expect. She charged directly at his horse. Startled by her sudden movement, the animal reared, throwing Blackwood off balance. In the ensuing confusion, Rosalinda broke free, running toward the house as Eleanor had instructed. Manuel provided covering fire, forcing Blackwood's men to dive for cover rather than pursue. But Eleanor's diversion cost her dearly. As the horse came back down, Blackwood regained control and lashed out, the back of his hand connecting with her cheek with enough force to send her sprawling in the dirt. "Foolish girl," he snarled, dismounting and hauling her to her feet by her arm. "That will cost you." Through the pain radiating from her cheek, Eleanor saw Rosalinda reach the safety of the house, where Manuel quickly pulled her inside and barred the door. At least they were safe and William would know what had happened. "Take her," Blackwood ordered one of his men. "Tie her hands. We're leaving before they can organize a defense." Eleanor found herself roughly bound and hoisted onto a horse, seated in front of one of Blackwood's men. As they rode away from Esperanza, she caught a final glimpse of Manuel emerging cautiously onto the porch, watching helplessly as they disappeared into the hills. They rode for hours, following game trails and dry washes to avoid the main roads. Eleanor's fear gradually gave way to a cold calculation as she memorized their route as best she could, noting landmarks that might help William track them. By nightfall, they had reached a small, isolated cabin deep in the hills, evidently a line shack or hunting lodge that Blackwood either owned or knew was abandoned. The men roughly deposited Eleanor inside, where a single room contained a crude table, a couple of chairs, and a narrow cot. "Make yourself comfortable, Mrs. York," Blackwood said mockingly. "This will be your accommodation until your husband sees reason." "He won't give in to your demands," Eleanor stated with more confidence than she felt. "William isn't a man who responds to threats." "Every man has his breaking point," Blackwood replied, his tone chillingly casual. "Even the Honorable William York will reconsider his principles when confronted with his wife's suffering." Eleanor refused to show fear, though his words sent ice through her veins. "The law will hunt you down for this. Kidnapping carries severe penalties even in the territories." Blackwood merely smiled. "Only if they find us, and only if there are witnesses left to testify." He turned to one of his men. "Keep a close watch on her. I'm going to send our demands to York." "With luck, this will all be resolved by tomorrow evening." Left alone with one guard, a thin, nervous man who kept his pistol trained on her from across the room, Eleanor assessed her situation. Her hands remained bound in front of her, but her feet were free. The cabin's only window was small and shuttered, the door heavy and undoubtedly guarded from outside as well. Escape seemed impossible, at least for the moment. Her best hope lay in William organizing a search party and in her own ability to stay alive and unharmed until they found her. Hours passed in tense silence. Her guard refused to answer questions or provide water despite her increasingly desperate thirst. As night deepened, exhaustion pulled at Eleanor, but she fought against sleep, unwilling to make herself more vulnerable than she already was. Sometime after midnight, the cabin door opened to admit another of Blackwood's men, coming to relieve the first guard. Eleanor noted with interest that the new man appeared both tired and irritable. "Anything from the boss?" the first guard asked as they changed positions. "Not yet." "He sent Jennings with the message, but it'll take time to reach York and get a response." The new guard glanced at Eleanor with undisguised contempt. "Has she been trouble?" "Quiet as a mouse," the first man replied. "Just staring like she is now gives me the creeps." "She's just a woman," the replacement scoffed. "Nothing to be scared of." Once alone with the new guard, Eleanor decided to test his temperament. "May I have some water, please? I haven't had anything to drink since this morning." The man considered her request, then shrugged. "I suppose there's no harm in water." He filled a tin cup from a canteen and approached cautiously, keeping his pistol ready. "No tricks or you'll regret it." "Thank you," Eleanor said, raising her bound hands to accept the cup. As she drank, she assessed him more carefully. Older than the first guard, with a weathered face that suggested years spent outdoors, but also bloodshot eyes and slightly unsteady movements that hinted at exhaustion, possibly combined with alcohol consumed earlier. "Your employer is making a serious mistake," she ventured after finishing the water. "My husband has powerful connections throughout the territory. This kidnapping will only strengthen the case against Blackwood." The guard snorted. "Save your breath. I'm paid to watch you, not talk to you." "Of course," Eleanor agreed mildly. "Though I wonder how much you're being paid to risk hanging. Kidnapping a woman, a newly married woman at that, tends to provoke extreme responses in these parts." A flicker of uncertainty crossed the man's face before he masked it with bravado. "Blackwood takes care of his men, always has." "Until they become liabilities," Eleanor suggested. "Men like him are loyal only to themselves. When trouble comes, do you really believe he'll protect you rather than save himself?" "Shut up," the guard growled, but his voice lacked conviction. Eleanor fell silent, sensing she had planted a seed of doubt. She would need to be careful not to push too hard too quickly, but perhaps she could turn this man's obvious fatigue and underlying uncertainty to her advantage. Over the next several hours, she alternated between apparent sleep and brief, seemingly innocent conversations that nonetheless emphasized the danger the guard faced for his role in her abduction. By dawn, she could see the strain of sleeplessness and worry taking its toll on him. "You should rest," she suggested when he stifled yet another yawn. "I'm not going anywhere with my hands tied, and there must be guards outside as well." He hesitated, clearly tempted by the idea. "Blackwood would have my hide if I fell asleep on watch." "Then at least sit down," Eleanor urged. "Standing all night can't be good for your leg." She had noticed his occasional winces when shifting his weight, an old injury, perhaps. After another moment's consideration, the guard pulled a chair closer to the door and sat heavily, his pistol still loosely aimed in her direction. "Just for a minute," he muttered, more to himself than to her. Eleanor pretended to doze off herself, slumping against the wall but watching through slitted eyes as the guard's head gradually drooped, his breathing growing deeper and more regular. When his chin finally touched his chest and the pistol's barrel dipped toward the floor, she moved, with her hands still bound. Options were limited. But months of heavy work at Blackburn's saloon and weeks of household chores at Esperanza had strengthened Eleanor's body more than her slight frame suggested. She crossed the room swiftly and silently, hefting the heavy water pitcher from the table. The guard never knew what hit him. The pitcher connected with the back of his head with a sickening crack, and he slumped forward unconscious. Eleanor quickly retrieved his pistol and used his own knife to cut her bonds. Now armed but still in extreme danger, she peered cautiously out the cabin's single window. Dawn was breaking over the hills, revealing a small clearing surrounded by scrub oak and juniper. She could see one man on watch by the horses, but no sign of Blackwood or others. The element of surprise was her only advantage. Taking a deep breath, Eleanor eased open the cabin door and slipped outside, keeping the unconscious guard's pistol steady in her hand. The morning air was cool against her face as she moved along the cabin wall, seeking a position that would give her a clear shot if necessary. The sentry by the horses was occupied with rolling a cigarette, his back partially turned to the cabin. Eleanor gauged the distance to the nearest horse, a sturdy brown gelding already saddled, if she could reach it without alerting the guard. A twig snapped beneath her foot and the guard's head jerked up. For a frozen moment they stared at each other across the clearing. Then he reached for his holstered weapon. Eleanor fired first, her shot wide but startling enough to make the man dive for cover rather than return fire immediately. She seized the opportunity, running for the horses as bullets splintered the wood of the cabin behind her. The brown gelding danced nervously at the gunfire, but Eleanor managed to grab its reins and swing herself into the saddle. She wheeled the animal toward the thinnest part of the surrounding brush and kicked it into motion just as more shots rang out. A burning pain across her upper arm told her at least one bullet had found its mark, but the wound seemed superficial. More concerning was the shouting behind her. The commotion had undoubtedly alerted Blackwood and any other men in the vicinity. Eleanor bent low over the horse's neck and urged it to greater speed, crashing through the underbrush onto a narrow trail that led downhill. Behind her, she could hear men scrambling to mount pursuit, Blackwood's voice rising above the others with curses and threats. She had no clear idea where she was or which direction would lead to safety, but downhill seemed logical. Water, settlements, and main roads were typically found in valleys rather than ridges. The horse responded well to her guidance, sure-footed despite the rough terrain and headlong pace. For nearly an hour, Eleanor rode hard, changing direction whenever the landscape permitted to confuse any pursuit. The wound on her arm throbbed painfully, blood soaking her sleeve, but she pushed the discomfort aside, focusing solely on escape. When the horse began to tire, she was forced to slow their pace, listening intently for sounds of pursuit. The hills had given way to more open country pinyon juniper woodland interspersed with grassy clearings. In the distance, she thought she could make out the silvery line of a river or creek. Hope surged within her. Water meant she could refresh herself and the horse, perhaps even follow the waterway to civilization. She guided the gelding toward the distant watercourse, allowing it to pick its way more carefully now that immediate danger seemed to have passed. The sun was high overhead when Eleanor finally reached the creek, wider than it had appeared from a distance, with a strong current suggesting it was fed by mountain snowmelt. She dismounted stiffly, her body protesting after hours in the saddle, and led the horse to drink while she assessed her situation more thoroughly. The bullet had grazed her upper arm, tearing her sleeve and leaving a shallow but painful furrow in her flesh. Using water from the creek, she cleaned the wound as best she could and bound it with a strip torn from her petticoat. Her next concern was determining her location relative to Esperanza or Socorro. The sun's position told her she was traveling roughly southeast, which aligned with her hope of reaching familiar territory. But she had no way of knowing how far she had come or how much further she needed to go. After allowing the horse adequate rest, Eleanor remounted and continued following the creek downstream, reasoning that it must eventually join a larger waterway or pass near a settlement. The afternoon wore on, her hunger and thirst becoming increasingly difficult to ignore despite drinking from the creek whenever possible. Then, as shadows lengthened across the landscape, she heard the sound that filled her with equal parts hope and fear: hoofbeats approaching from behind. Urging her tiring mount into the shelter of a dense stand of cottonwoods along the creek bank, Eleanor drew the pistol she had taken from the guard. 6 bullets remained in the cylinder, not many if Blackwood had rallied all his men for the pursuit. The hoofbeats grew louder, then slowed. A voice called out, a voice that made Eleanor's heart leap with recognition. "Eleanor, Eleanor, are you there? William," she cried, emerging from her hiding place with tears of relief streaming down her face. "Here, I'm here." And then he was there, practically leaping from his horse to gather her in his arms, his face a mixture of desperate relief and lingering fear as he checked her for injuries. "You're hurt," he said, gently touching the makeshift bandage on her arm. "It's just a graze," she assured him, clinging to him as though he might disappear if she let go. "How did you find me?" "Manuel and Rosalinda told me what happened," William explained, still holding her close. "We've been searching since yesterday." One of Blackwood's men turned himself in to the sheriff this morning, conscience-stricken after Blackwood ordered him to deliver a ransom demand. "He told us approximately where they were holding you." Only then did Eleanor notice they weren't alone. Behind William stood Sheriff Martinez and at least a dozen other men, including Manuel and several neighboring ranchers who had joined the search party. "Blackwood?" she asked, suddenly remembering the danger wasn't fully past. "Cornered at the line shack where you were held," the sheriff replied. "Two of his men are dead. Seems they exchanged fire with each other in the confusion after your escape. Blackwood himself is in custody, along with the rest of his gang." William's arms tightened around her. "It's over, Eleanor, truly over. Blackwood will face charges of kidnapping, attempted murder, arson, and a host of other crimes. The territorial governor has taken a personal interest in the case." The full impact of her ordeal suddenly caught up with Eleanor. Her knees buckled, and she would have fallen if not for William's support. "Let's get you home," he murmured, lifting her easily into his arms and carrying her to his horse. "You're safe now, I've got you." The journey back to Esperanza passed in a blur for Eleanor, exhaustion and emotional aftermath combining to create a dreamlike state. She was vaguely aware of being examined by a doctor, of Rosalinda's tearful ministrations, of William's constant, protective presence at her side. When she finally awoke fully, she was in their bedroom at the ranch, clean and comfortable in a fresh nightgown, her injured arm properly bandaged. Sunlight streamed through the window, suggesting it was mid-morning of the day following her rescue. William sat in a chair beside the bed, his own eyes closed in much-needed rest. Eleanor studied his face, the strong lines now softened in sleep, the dark shadows of exhaustion beneath his eyes testifying to his desperate search for her. As if sensing her gaze, he stirred, his eyes opening to find her watching him. Relief and love transformed his expression. "Good morning," he said softly, moving from the chair to sit beside her on the bed. "How do you feel?" "Better," Eleanor replied, reaching for his hand. "Thanks to you." William shook his head. "You saved yourself, Eleanor. I've heard the whole story from Blackwood's men, how you overpowered your guard and escaped on your own. You're the bravest woman I've ever known." "I had something worth fighting to return to," she said simply, squeezing his fingers. "Someone worth fighting for," his eyes darkened with emotion. "When Manuel told me Blackwood had taken you, I thought my heart would stop. These past months you've become everything to me, Eleanor, the thought of losing you." "You didn't lose me," she assured him, tugging him closer. "And you won't. We've faced the worst Blackwood could throw at us and we've survived." William bent to kiss her, a gentle but fervent affirmation of her words. When he finally pulled back, his expression was both tender and determined. "Blackwood will never threaten us again," he promised. "The evidence we presented to the territorial officials, combined with the kidnapping and your testimony, ensures he'll spend years in prison. His assets are already being seized to compensate those he's wronged." "And Esperanza?" Eleanor asked, thinking of the burned barn and other damage. "Will be stronger than ever," William replied with quiet confidence. "The neighbors who joined the search for you have also pledged help rebuilding. We'll have a new barn raised within the week." She smiled, picturing the community coming together in the aftermath of shared adversity. And then, William continued, brushing a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers, "we build the life we want, together. No more looking over our shoulders, no more threats from men like Blackburn or Blackwood." "It sounds perfect," Eleanor murmured, leaning into his touch. "Not perfect," William corrected, his lips curving into a smile. "Real, with challenges and hard work and occasional disagreements, I'm sure, but also with love and respect and partnership." He paused, his expression growing more serious. "I didn't say it before, Eleanor, perhaps because everything happened so quickly between us, but I love you, deeply and completely." Joy bloomed in Eleanor's chest, bright and warm as the New Mexico sunshine streaming through their window. "And I love you, William. I think I began falling in love with you that first day at the Silver Spur, when you looked at me like a person worthy of respect rather than just another serving girl." "You've always been worthy of respect," he said firmly. "All I did was recognize what was already there." Eleanor reached up to touch his face, marveling at how far they'd come in such a short time. From debtor to employee to wife, from hopelessness to love, the journey had been tumultuous, but had led to this moment of perfect understanding between them. "Rest now," William urged, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "There will be time for everything else later." "Stay with me," she asked, unwilling to be separated from him just yet. Always, he promised, stretching out beside her on the bed and gathering her carefully against his side, mindful of her injured arm. As Eleanor drifted back to sleep in the safety of her husband's embrace, she reflected on the strange path that had led her to this happiness. Blackburn's cruelty and greed had inadvertently brought her to William. Desperation had opened the door to hope, and what had begun as a practical arrangement had blossomed into a love deeper and truer than she had ever dared imagine. In the months and years that followed, Esperanza flourished under their joint stewardship. The ranch expanded, adding new pastures and cattle, becoming one of the most prosperous in the territory. William's fair business practices and Eleanor's compassionate management of the household staff earned them respect throughout the region. Children came first: a son with William's thoughtful gray eyes, then twin daughters who inherited Eleanor's quiet determination. The family grew alongside the ranch, their roots deepening in the New Mexico soil with each passing season. Eleanor never forgot her time at Blackburn's Saloon or the debt that had nearly consumed her future. Rather than burying those memories, she used them to fuel her commitment to helping others in similar circumstances. With William's full support, she established a fund to assist women trapped in exploitative situations, offering them the same chance at freedom and dignity that she had received. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the day's work complete, Eleanor and William would often sit together on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and crimson, a daily reminder of how darkness could give way to beauty, and how salvation sometimes came in the most unexpected forms. For Eleanor, who had once believed her life's possibilities were limited to serving drinks and accumulating debt in a dusty saloon, the journey to becoming mistress of Esperanza and beloved wife of William York remained something of a miracle. But it was a miracle built on courage, respect, and the transformative power of love, a foundation strong enough to support all the joy and challenge that life continued to bring their way.